Guys, my cat scratched the shit out of me, so look at this, man. It's a little distracting. Huh? What's up? Just got back from the gym. I feel good. I'm going like 6 days a week, man. And I'm doing boxing on my own. I took like 4 lessons, and it's life changing. Feels awesome. Just getting my stream set up here. All right. Doing a quick. All right. So I'm just posting on X and Blue Sky like I always do. So get ready. We're going to be reading The Warehouse, a visual primer on mass incarceration by James Kilgore and Vic Liu. Let me post my live now links. Doing a quick book reading session. Dun dun dun. All right, guys. So where we left off was, I believe, we were talking about the Nixon years, about crime, the Ronald Reagan years, the Clinton presidency, and what have we learned so far about mass incarceration in the prison system? Well, as corporate profits fell in the 80s, we had a serious boom. Social services were cut. A bunch of prisons got built. It's been on a steady increase since the 60s, but they really exploded in the 80s. So with social services being cut, people get locked up. And Clinton, that's the last chapter we read. And man, the 1994 crime bill, quite possibly the most racist crime bill in United States history, written by Biden, who is a Democrat. Okay, what do I like talking about on my channel? Video games, movies, but guys, the two-party solution, the duopoly is a sham. What I like to do is wake people up to the two-party illusion. Democrats are not the lesser evil. Democrats and the Republicans are the same. And that's why I'm reading this book, for one, is all these horrible things that Republicans and Democrats do together. So, but we left off on there's a quote from Joe Biden there. That was the last thing I read. We're going to be talking about the George W. Bush. George W. And what policies did he enact? So this is page 29. If you missed part 1 of this book, my live is up, but we'll continue that. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to edit it down to post in a non-live version. So, but let's continue our reading of The Warehouse, a visual primer on mass incarceration by James Kilgore and Vic Liu. Page 29. The George W. Bush presidency. Get this out of the way. George W. Bush continued the war on drugs, but shifted targets from his predecessors. He prioritized attacking the use of marijuana. By 2005, arrests for marijuana accounted for almost half of the nation's drug bust. He almost doubled the amount a decade earlier. Across the country, drug enforcement teams mounted raids on medical marijuana dispensaries. As of 2022, at least 13 states were requiring drug testing for recipients of public benefits. Like his father, he also kept an international focus on the war, spending $5.4 billion during his first term to eradicate cocaine production and trafficking from Latin America. The result, coca cultivation in the Andes of South America rose 29%. Yet after the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center in 2001, the focus on drugs drifted. As the FBI stated at the time, the number one stated priority for the FBI is to prevent another attack. Other things are not the primary focus. We've had to retool, close quote. Here's a quote from Timothy Lynch, director of the Project on Criminal Justice at the conservative Cato Institute. Quote, The president can sell the war on drugs in peacetime, but to continue that kind of rhetoric in the middle of a real war when American soldiers are getting blown up in Iraq makes it look trivial. Close quote. All right, let's go to the next page here. The Obama presidency, 2009 to 2017. Obama came to the presidency with a quiet determination to fundamentally alter the war on drugs. To begin with, he stopped using that term, preferring, in the media at least, to cast drugs as a public health issue. He undertook 3 major steps of reform. For the first time since the days of Jimmy Carter, the federal budget allocated more money to drug treatment than drug law enforcement. Moreover, as a number of states stepped up efforts to legalize or decriminalize marijuana, Obama didn't use the existing federal law, which still outlawed cannabis, to overrule the states. Lastly, he did grant release to a number of people in the federal prison system who had received long sentences for low-level drug offenses. As a result, the federal prison system population actually fell during the Obama years for the first time in decades. The 21st Century Cures Act. Furthermore, the opioid epidemic surfaced during Obama's second term. Rather than the lock 'em up and throw away the key approach that had dominated the early years of the drug war, the administration's response was a public health initiative, the 21st Century Cures Act, which added $6.3 billion to public health spending on opioid addiction treatment. While these high-profile actions slowed down the drug war offensive, the shape of mass incarceration and the paradigm of punishment did not fundamentally change. Some observers referred to the Cures Act as lipstick on a pig, as it added funding to opioid treatment by slashing funds from other public health initiatives such as immunizations and tobacco consumption. Moreover, the response to the opioid epidemic, which directly impacted white people from reasonably well-to-do families, sparked a different policy and media response than the crusades of the 1980s and 1990s, which depicted black drug users as crackheads and their children as crack babies. The policy and media response was typically, how can we punish these people and keep them off the streets? Media often portrayed white opioid users sympathetically. It highlighted their success stories and labeled their addiction as tragedy rather than degeneracy. Black baseball star Darryl Strawberry, whose challenges with substance use became a media story, noted that the stigma was so wrong for African Americans. They couldn't get the help they needed because everybody looked at them as less than. Obama's efforts to address the racialized disparities between punishment for crack and powder cocaine reduced but did not eliminate the inequality, leaving the same punishment in place for 1 ounce of crack cocaine as for 18 ounces of powder. In addition, Obama's administration opened the door much wider to private prison operators. From 2005 to 2011, the revenue from the federal government for the GEO Group, which by 2018 had become the world's largest private prison operator, skyrocketed from $138.8 million in 2005 to $640 million in 2011, an increment of 364%. The bulk of that revenue came from contracts to detain and monitor immigrants. The Trump presidency, 2017 to 2021. During the 2016 election campaign, Donald Trump announced, "I am the law and order candidate." His platform followed that law and order line. He supported the reinstatement of the death penalty, had little to say about modifying harsh sentencing laws, and was a great champion of the expansion of private prisons. In addition, he advocated a great reduction in immigrant visas and applications for amnesty, while aggressively promoting the extension of the wall along the Mexican border. His narrative echoed the politics of fear of the early years of mass incarceration. These policies were no surprise. Trump had a history. In his 2000 book, The America We Deserved, he claimed that, quote, tough crime policies are the most important form of national defense, close quote. As president, he urged police to, quote, not be too nice, close quote. Yet while Trump pushed the law and order theme in I Love the Cops, was a repeating slogan in his rallies, he also championed a very mild set of reforms encapsulated in the First Step Act of 2018. The First Step Act reduced mandatory minimums on some drug sentences, including the penalty for crack cocaine. He lowered the three strikes penalty to 25 years instead of a life sentence and banned the shackling of pregnant people imprisoned. The First Step Act stirred lots of controversy. Criminal justice reform advocates like the liberal think tank Brennan Center in New York argued that the act was, quote, one step in the right direction for reducing mass incarceration in the U.S. However, close quote, however, more radical groups like the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls rejected the approach of the act. In a petition to Congress, Andrea James, the executive director of the council, offered a harsh critique of the act. Quote, making the conditions of imprisonment marginally better does nothing to address the crisis of mass incarceration. Instead of steps, we must think about leaps forward. Close quote. For her, such leaps would include the repeal of the 1994 crime bill and the mandatory minimums in the, quote, other policies that have led to mass incarceration of black and brown people and our children, close quote. Here's a quote from Donald Trump. Quote, if I don't win, America's suburbs will be overrun with low-income projects, anarchists, agitators, looters, and, of course, friendly protesters, close quote. And then by 2021, more than 1,774,000 people were incarcerated in the United States. It has a little graphic there. So, all right. Page 34, the war on immigrants. The U.S. claims to be a melting pot. A nation of immigrants is the national narrative. However, from the outset, the relationship of settler, colonialist, and other populations has been on a war footing. While much of the population in the U.S. today has ancestry from different parts of the world, the pathway for people here was not one based on voluntary movement through visas and passports and legal processes. Instead, millions of immigrants came to the U.S. as a result of violence and forced labor. Subtitle: a key component of the war on immigrants is the issue of labor. World War II was a key moment in establishing the connection between immigration and labor. The war enlisted much of the U.S. labor force into the armed forces. In their absence, the hunt for workers to replace them went outside U.S. borders, primarily to Mexico. In 1942, the U.S. government set up the Bracero program, which opened the door to workers from Mexico to contract to work in the U.S. industry, primarily in agriculture. While thousands of workers did come from Mexico through the Bracero program work permit process, many others found their way to U.S. factories and fields without such clearance. Many employers were willing to turn a blind eye to a person's legal immigration status if they could obtain laborers who often work at wages far below those of their U.S. counterparts. However, at times, anti-immigrant sentiments, much like we have seen in the U.S. in recent years, prompted the government to deport workers by force. For example, in 1953, the government initiated a deportation action called Operation Wetback, in which immigration authorities rounded up hundreds of thousands of people of Mexican origin, even some who were U.S. citizens, and flew them back to Mexico. Subsequently, in the 1980s, under President Reagan, the federal government intensified the repression of immigrants by creating a system of detention centers, more appropriately called immigration prisons. Since that time, the war against immigrants has ebbed and flowed in its intensity, with the pendulum swinging toward deportation at certain moments, blocking the border at other moments, and then at others providing legal avenues for citizenship and work permits. This ebb and flow is largely related to the demand for labor from U.S. employers. A key moment in the war on immigrants was the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. This treaty opened the door for U.S. companies to buy farmland in Mexico, a practice the Mexican government had outlawed since the 1930s. U.S. companies then bought up hundreds of thousands of acres of agricultural land in Mexico often displacing local farmers and farm workers in the process. Many of these landless people saw going to the U.S. as the only viable economic alternative. The massive flow of immigrants triggered anti immigrant sentiment and legal repression by the administration of Bill Clinton. Part of these changes included deporting people who had criminal convictions. The number deported due to their criminal record grew from 37,724 in 1996 to 90,000 90,426 in 2005. The total number of people deported during that time grew from just over 100,000 to more than 250,000 in 2005. After 9/11, the attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, stoked the fires of anti-immigrant sentiment, particularly toward Muslims and people from the Middle East. The Patriot Act of 2001 led to the formation of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. The zeal for anti-immigrant measures resulted in the budget for ICE exceeding the combined budgets of the FBI, the CIA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the DEA. Wow. Popular sentiment among the U.S. population also inspired the expansion of a new project, the building of a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border. Between 2006 and 2009, the U.S. government spent $2.4 billion in the construction of 670 miles of border wall. The building of the wall went hand in hand with the expansion of the surveillance of immigrants. Under the Intensive Supervision Appearance Program, ISAP, thousands of immigrants came under electronic surveillance of various forms. Many were put on GPS ankle monitors, even though they had not been convicted of any crime. In addition to the use of electronic surveillance, ICE contracted with a number of companies like Thomson Reuters, LexisNexis, and Palantir to compile personal digital files on millions of immigrants. Some activists argue that these files are weaponized, used against the interest of immigrants. Research by organizations like Just Futures Law and Mahente have revealed how the data on individuals can be shared with other law enforcement agencies or sold to private companies that use it to market goods or to highlight those deemed to be high-risk individuals. In addition to this increased technology, we also saw a rapid growth in immigration prisons. Whereas in 1981, there were just 54 immigrants in such prisons. By 2011, the population had risen to over 32,000. Let's see, here's a cool graphic. I like the font here. For every one person born, there were 3 admissions to jail in the U.S. in 2019. In 2019, the U.S. had 10.3 million admissions into jail. Sheesh. So, guys, actually have to take a break. I really need to start cooking dinner. I guess this is a short stream for now. But this is part 2 of The Warehouse, a visual primer on mass incarceration. Guys, I'm going live 5 times a week. I'm going to try and do, what did we leave off? Page 43. I'm going to be live Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. I struggle with content creation because I don't have a schedule on streaming. But I'm going to take a break. I'm going to make dinner, eat, and then I'm going to play some video games. I'm going to play Neo for PS4 on my PS5. But I'm going to play a co-op horror game called Reanimal with my friend Uchi. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Central. But before that, I'll play Neo. So, okay. Thanks for hanging out for the short stream. And plenty of more book readings to come. So, thanks for watching.